Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, the podcast dedicated to helping accounting firms stay ahead of the curve. Our mission is to provide you with the latest and greatest insights on cutting-edge tools, innovative marketing strategies, virtual CFO services, and alternative billing methods. Join us as we change the way people think about accounting.
Adam, how you doing today?
Doing great.
Good. Hey, let's introduce this podcast. I think people are going to enjoy this one.
Oh yeah,
What did you think about Kai?
Oh, Kai was great. I mean, the topic in the front is ESG, right? So I don't think that gets everybody super excited and ready to do stuff, but it's really cool. And it's one of those things that we hear about all the time. It's at all the AI CPA conferences.
Right.
I'll be honest, sometimes it just goes over my head, but the way Kai talked about it, not only did I gain a better understanding of it, but how we're going to see it and utilize it in the future. So I thought he did a great job. He's a great resource. So look forward to just jumping in and talking to him here in a little bit. What'd you think?
I agree. I think I learned more in this podcast than maybe any other. Because if someone says, "Hey, what do you think about ESG?" I usually get this sort of, interesting. And if they were to say, "Can you talk about it for maybe even 1 minute?" I'd be like, "Okay, maybe I don't understand it." And now I feel like I do. And he gave a couple pretty practical tips if you're interested in a company and how they're doing. And that part I really did enjoy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great talk and look forward to listening in. Let's go jump in and talk.
Sounds great. All right, welcome to this episode of the Modern CPA Success Show. I'm Tom Waddleton. I am a virtual CFO, so I do business consulting with our clients and play the role of CFO. I'm co-hosting today's show with Adam Hale. Adam actually runs our practice, which is Summit Virtual CFO by Anders. Adam, welcome today.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, we've got a great topic that covers, in addition to a little bit of accounting, actually not much of accounting, but it definitely affects accountants and certainly can, and then just us as consumers and good people. Kai Gray is with us. Kai is the CEO and founder of Motive. Kai, welcome to our show today.
Thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, so as I was looking through your bio and as we chat a little bit, you've worked with several well-known innovative companies. I'd love as an intro just to hear a little bit more about your career story and what led you to found Motive.
Sure. So so I started out life in computer science, and from a technology background, I worked for companies like Carbonite and Yahoo, and most recently Western Digital after some acquisitions. And it was really, about 4 years ago, I teamed up with my brother, who was a professor of ESG, had done his PhD at Oxford, and I spent a lot of time with him talking about this and saw a real, I would say, gap in the market. There was sort of a lot of private companies were being left out of the ESG landscape. ESG was really focused on public companies, still is, but more and more private companies were being called on to supply ESG data. And so we became sort of very focused on helping these companies effectively deal with what is a compliance issue today. It's around ESG data, both understanding it, responding to it, and then ultimately using it to the company's benefit. Right? We really see ESG as a business driver for companies, and we like the idea of it moving away from compliance and into something where they can attract new business, they can strengthen current business. So that's a little bit about very quickly why I got into it, when I got into it, and so we have developed a practice that, as we say, it's software with service, not software as a service. And so we have a fairly robust software platform that helps our clients. We also provide sort of very dedicated expert consulting to our clients.
Cool. I think the title of this should be "What the heck is ESG, and why do we care?" Because I will say it was probably, honestly, I didn't even pick up on it the first year I heard it. But I know that whenever we go to AI CPA events, ESG is always a topic at the AI CPA.
Yes.
And it's whenever they list top 5 issues, ESG is always up there. And for years, I'm just like, what does that stand for again? Like I'm Googling it and then I'm going, and how is this relevant? So if you could just kind of, because to your point, and I know we'll get into it, but my understanding was, and then I would turn it off a little bit, was that it was for big public companies, which most practitioners are never going to run into, right? Like this is the Deloitte Touches of the world, the Ernst and Youngs.
Yep.
And it seemed like from a consulting perspective, it was a really high-end consulting thing for the top, for the big four. But over time, I think it's evolved into what you were kind of talking about, where it started to slowly like work itself down and eventually will be a part of potentially everybody's everyday life. But if you could just kind of give us in layman's terms, like explain what ESG is and why you do think that it's so relevant and important, and how maybe it'll get even more relevant.
So I think the most important thing is to sort of understand that ESG is not a measure of good company versus bad company. And this is where I think the narrative has gone off the track, certainly, as it's discussed from a political perspective. But ESG is a collection of roughly 200 different metrics around environmental, social, and governance data. And it's really, the way I look at ESG is it's a measure of transparency. How much information as an investor in a stock, in a publicly traded company, do I have to make an informed decision about a company? And so, ESG asks a number of questions. It's really interesting because if you reverse the order of ESG and talk about governance first, you get a much greater acceptance level from an audience when you're talking about it. Because the thing, so very few people debate the need for governance and good governance of companies. And so there's questions sort of about independent board members, about policies that the board has, audit committees, things that you look for in a company, that you want to see a well-run company. That's the G in ESG. Environmental is, basically a measure of emissions, largely greenhouse gas emissions data, sort of water usage, waste usage, recycling. It's really, the way I look at it is does a company understand their business well enough to have that data? And it's always measured on a sort of a millions of dollars in revenue per millions of dollars in revenue. And then the social aspect is, despite the name, and I think this is what really throws ESG off a little bit, is that people think that, the term social has taken on a bit of a negative connotation. And really it's around workplace accidents and incidents. It's about employee training, how many dollars per year are allocated to employee training. A lot of sort of health and wellness policies in place, right to unionization, those types of things. A very small number of questions deal with what I think people think ESG is all about sort of gender, sort of the equality questions, which are important, but make up a very small portion of the ESG metric data. And so
it's not like how much money they're giving to a different organization or anything like that. That's not what it's measuring.
In fact, it doesn't include anything like that. It's really not it's not trying to measure the principles or values of a company. It's not, and I always say, like, you can look at certain companies like Exxon that are very highly rated from an ESG perspective. In fact, they're included in most ESG funds because they do a great job of publishing their data. It's all about disclosure. That's ESG is basically a reflection of disclosure. It's, so the ESG rating agencies aren't making up their own data. What they're doing is they're taking disclosure data from companies and just sort of mimicking that back in a slightly different format, and then applying a grade to that. So, and it's always based on sort of a percentile, and that's really what you're looking for. And so, you know, this is always a bit of a surprise to when I speak about ESG. Most people come into the conversation, if they don't know a lot about it, they've heard about it from headlines and news and things like that. And I think it's always a bit surprising when people realize, like, oh, it really has no inherent political bias. It is called extra or non-financial information, and it's starting to get reported along with financials, because a lot of these things are material to the operations of a company, and so it's stuff that investors should know. But it's not there to effectively judge companies. And it doesn't, there's also a difference between sustainability and ESG. Two very different concepts. Sustainability is sort of inherently an environmental goal, and sort of how sustainable you are to your stakeholders, your community, but principally about the environment. ESG is just data, right, across a number of different facets of your business.
Elevate your firm with a virtual CFO playbook, how to land $60,000 per year clients and provide a killer client experience. This comprehensive online series of modules provides you with the essential tools to create and deliver scalable VCFO services. Developed from Summit's successful approach, which propelled them from $500,000 to over $10 million in revenue in 10 years. This playbook will equip you with the skills to take your firm to the next level. Additionally, upon completion, you can receive 24 hours of CPE credit for the course. Ready to grow your firm? Enroll now at vcfoplaybook.summitcpa.net.
Okay. And you talked about, I'd love to hear how this landscape's changing. You've mentioned public companies a lot. That's sort of where it started, maybe where they're being told they should do it.
That's right.
You talk a little bit about where it's going and kind of where that, I believe a lot of this has really come from outside the US initially, and now more into the US where it's adopting. Can you tell us a little bit about how the landscape's changing?
Sure. And so you're absolutely right. So really, I would say Europe is a few years ahead of the US in terms of adoption of ESG and just sort of normalization of this sort of understanding that, a well-run company encompasses more than just purely financials. There are other measures. And so they have a more stringent ESG perspective. It's starting to catch up in the US. And what's happening, as you noted, so this started with public companies. Public companies are the only ones that have to disclose data legally. But it has seeped down into smaller companies. And now we end up working with, much smaller companies. And by that, I mean companies in the $5 to $10 million a year revenue group, because they are suppliers to larger companies. And so if you think about sort of a tier one customer being, take Coca-Cola, for instance, or a car manufacturer, they have pretty extensive ESG programs. Their annual reporting is very comprehensive. What they're doing is they're going back to their supply chain and they're saying, hey, we need you to comply with all of our goals. We've set a goal to be net zero emissions by 2035 or something. And in order to achieve that, it means that all of their suppliers have to do that. And so, first it was tier one suppliers, then tier two suppliers. And now, it's down to, I call them the mom and pops. They're bigger than that, but that's the idea. And so that's what's happening. In fact, when we first started, really the companies that approached us first were not public companies. We really thought we were going to be helping just public companies, but it was companies that came to us and some of them quite large and said, hey, we can't bid on this project unless we submit an ESG report. And this customer represents 30% of our revenue. So we have no idea what to do, but we know we have to do this. And that has been the case sort of over and over in different ways, but it's always sort of the same thing, which is, hey, we have to do this if we want to participate. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I know that there's I think public comment is closed, but there's some regulations that are going in, the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR for GSA, DoD, and NASA, that are starting to stipulate certain disclosures if you would like to be a supplier to them. So if you make widgets that go into a vehicle for GSA or go into a vehicle for DoD, you're going to have to start submitting disclosure data that's, largely environmental based, a lot of climate stuff, but gets into hiring practices, gets into the structure of your company. So I think that this stuff is starting to really federate its way into all businesses.
Yeah, it seems like this is going to be, what I heard probably most from it early on, once I started to kind of get to know it a little bit better. But I appreciate your explanation, because I too was kind of maybe a little I had a misunderstanding there, especially on some of the social stuff. But it did seem like what I was hearing, especially as it relates to the accounting profession, is that it's going to open up a lot of doors for us to hire and work with people that are not CPAs or traditional accounting firm people. Like, we're going to be working with engineers. We're going to, all these different specialties, all of a sudden we might find within larger CPA firms, medium CPA firms kind of going forward, or at least having to work with consultancy agencies that didn't exist 5-10 years ago, those kind of things.
Yeah. I think so our experience with CPA firms has been that there's two groups that companies call when they don't know an answer to something. You can call your lawyers or you can call your CPAs, right? Both are trusted. Right. So whatever those groups say is what you're going to do. And so what happens is when these smaller private companies are faced with this, their first call will be to their CPAs and say, hey, I just, I don't know what to do. I need help with this. And so, I think it really, it's to the benefit of the CPA firms. And really, I think it's almost approaching sort of the requirement that the firms are able to deliver a knowledgeable answer. Say, hey, I know what this is. Here's how we're going to respond. Don't worry about it, right? We have this. And effectively, I look at ESG as another product in the portfolio of CPA firms.
Yeah, and I would say that, most of them outside of large firms, and then eventually it'll kind of trickle itself down to medium firms, it's going to be hard for them to create that department, especially with all the complexity, the software, those kind of things. And so for our role as VCFOs, what we've always told our clients is it's not for us to be a subject matter expert in everything, but because our expertise really lies on forecasting and strategic planning, but we are expected to kind of know everybody. So meaning we understand what ESG is, and I should always be able to say, and I got somebody in that can help us with that. I know somebody, Kai can come in and help us with that. So even smaller firms that think, hey, this is still way out of my league, as you mentioned, if they pick up government contracts or things like this, they might all of a sudden get this mini report. And so that needs to be done from a compliance standpoint. And so knowing somebody that can fill that gap, that has created a business around that is really important. So can you talk to us about, because I know you do these kind of things. Is there a heavy, medium, small or light version of this reporting? And what does that kind of cost structure look like, for a client?
Sure. So so it really, there is that sort of large, medium, small type thing depending on the disclosure. So when we work with a large public company, it's doing their annual reports. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's basically putting together sort of similar to the financial side, where it's a 6-month effort. You start really, we're in the planning stages now with some of our clients for their January dates, to get everything ready. Unlike financials, there's a bit more marketing, and we'll get into that in a bit about sort of what goes into the reports. But then on the smaller side, I mean, so we offer something we call the virtual ESG manager, which is a lighter touch, some software, some expert sort of consultation for companies who don't want to hire a full-time person. They need a few hours a month, and they need some resources occasionally, right? And so the prices range from $1,000 a month to large engagements that are 50 plus, 75 plus, that are pretty heavy consulting engagements, to the smaller $1,000 a month. And everything, I will say, because there's not a lot of standardization in ESG, everything we take it all on a case-by-case scenario, because there's definitely the industry is still fairly bespoke, and so the requirements of company A might be vastly different than company B, even if they're the same size, right? Depending on their industry, depending on what their goals are, it might be very, very different. So some companies we're involved in where we're working with them on a weekly basis. Other companies, it's sort of quarterly check-ins, right? And they call us when they have a customer that has a demand from them, and they need to know what to do. So it really varies. Sometimes I wish there was more standardization. I wish just from a pricing perspective, I'd like that. But
sure.
But right now we have found that we can't, it's very hard for us to offer sort of rack rate pricing without talking to the customer and finding out what they're trying to do.
Kai, do you find, so a small company, maybe it doesn't matter the size company, comes and says, my customer wants this. Does that usually end up with an ongoing engagement with your company? Or do you tend to be in a, hey, there's a project mode, I'll get you up, but then is there a portion that get themselves kind of independent after that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, our goal is actually to get companies independent, right? Where, we always want to grow with companies. And of course, as a business, we want sort of long-term relationships. But I think that, in our experience, teaching people what to do, even if it doesn't result in sort of, immediate reoccurring revenue, is a good long-term practice for us. And so, if we have a small company who comes in and, they have a customer request, or there's some contract that they're working on that requires it, we can get them over that hurdle. We teach them sort of what the strategy is, what to do. And, I would say 9 out of 10 times, they do come back and say, oh, we have another project that's similar. We'd like your help on it. But we feel like we've always armed them with the information that they need if they wanted to go at it alone, that they could.
Yeah, but I mean, armed with that, then you can't do it, right? Like, so that's the thing. It's like, obviously, selfishly, I'm a big proponent of outsourcing, specialties and stuff like that. It's just hard to be a subject matter expert of everything. And for me, it's like, you want to educate them for sure, right? Like, you want to make sure they know what they're doing. That makes your life easier, and it ultimately will save them money. But but it would be nice to always be able to, I mean, if it was me and I was engaging you, it'd be like, oh, instead of having to harass you for 20 hours a month, education means I just need you for a couple hours a month. But
and I think that's where we get our clients. And the irony is, the more we educate them, the more that they trust us, and the better the relationship is, and so 100%. It always ends up being beneficial to us and the firm. But and I think that companies grow and the strategy changes. We have a client who they've seen an enormous amount of success from their work around ESG and sustainability, to the point where it's started a whole sort of movement within the company and a marketing pivot to really just to lead with this. And so when we started, it was just to do an ESG report for them. And now it's, I mean, I feel like we talk to them every day, but it because it's just they went out with the message. It had such a high return for them. They said, "Oh, we want more of this," and that's just it sort of doubles every month. And so we could never have predicted that, right? So and even for many, just like the sort of fractional CFO, I think that the idea is, there's no sense in hiring a chief sustainability officer or head of ESG for $150,000 a year or whatever, when what you need is 5 hours a month, or you need 10 hours a month from someone.
Yeah. So. Kai, I wonder, some of the people listening might be thinking, I don't hear about this from my clients. Maybe it's not impacting me. I can tell you my own story. 10 years ago, integrated reporting was being talked about a lot, as it is now. I worked for a Fortune 100 pharma company. So it was a big company. I happened to be in the external reporting group, annual reports, that stuff. I was also on the Indiana board of directors for the CPA Society. Integrated reporting's big. They asked us, hey, in your own companies, figure out where it's going. So long story short, I did some interviewing internally, the external reporting group, and said, are people asking for this? And at least to the finance people, it was no one's asking, and we don't want to do this kind of stuff. And I also talked to our auditor.
Yes.
Same thing. Yeah. In doing my Google research to kind of put this all together, what I found was my own company had just published its third integrated report, never even talked to finance.
Interesting.
And the auditor, Ernst & Young, who had said we would be doing the assurance, was like, what the heck? They didn't call us. And I talked to guys like, we didn't need finance. We found an engineering company to do it. So what it brings me back to is there are questions we could ask our clients to learn about this, because we all thought we knew what was going on and didn't even realize they didn't need finance to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So I think integrated reporting for public companies is it's sort of the next big thing. I do think ESG is going to take on sort of a SOC 2 type thing where if you say this, it has to be true, and you're going to sign here, and someone's going to be accountable for these numbers, and which sort of brings that back into, it makes integrated reporting a very logical thing for companies. If you're already going to present it in that way, it's sort of the SOC 2 sort of compliance way, you might as well just bundle it all together. And a lot of people look at ESG as being, truly material to the company, which is important. I mean, the CEO of Coca-Cola, I forget when he said it, but it was fairly recent, and he was talking about the sort of political backlash to ESG, and he said, he goes, understand, if the term ESG becomes too toxic, we will simply call it something else and do the same things. He said, it's not. He said, it's core to our business, and so it's important. It's not something we can abandon just because the political winds have changed. And I think that, when you start to get it, ESG is very much about materiality, what's important to this business in this industry. And so from an investor perspective, for a public company, this becomes, really important information to have if you're making an investment, to understand, is this company a well-run company? Are they going to, are they going to end up in the front pages for all the wrong reasons? Are they going to be heavily invested in industries that are controversial or going to go away? There's a number of aspects. So I think integrated reporting makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's absolutely where we're going to see the Fortune 500 move to over the next couple of years.
Yeah. So if you're this accountant saying, okay, so I'm not hearing about it, what are some questions you might ask your clients if you're curious, if they're dealing with this and you're just not in the loop? Or are you thinking of?
Well, I would I would ask really about sort of their customers, who their customers are. And have they talked to their customers about this? And did their customers have, so if I'm a small company, and I'm a 50-person manufacturing firm, and I'm supplying parts to, to Toyota, for instance, right? you can go to Toyota's website, you can download their ESG report, and you can read about all the things that they're trying to do. My next conversation with Toyota is going to be how I support that. Like, not only is my product better or cheaper, things like that, but we are more aligned with you from an ESG perspective than our competitors. And so this is where I start to see ESG as being a competitive advantage, because I really do think that, you're going to see this bifurcation of sort of the early adopters and the laggards, where the early adopters, or the people that are doing this, are starting to use ESG as part of the sales cycle, right? They're saying, okay, all things being equal, we're much better aligned. We support your current initiatives. We're in line with them, as part of the do no harm type thing. And, and then pointing at their competitors and saying, you should ask them about that, see how they do, right? And that's what we're actually seeing. I mean, not only do we advise our customers to do that, but we've seen it in real life. And so I think, putting that, I'm not willing to argue that ESG is a standalone sales method, but I think it's one of these, it's another arrow in sort of the, the pack of for a salesperson or a business development person who's out there talking to. And, if I'm talking to my customers, I'm going to make sure I know what my customers cares about. And, if I'm aligned with that, if I'm doing stuff that supports that, I'm going to lead with that. Right? Say, hey, I know this is important to you. I know that, your net zero policy is important to you. I know your hiring, your supply chain, code of conduct, all of these things. Here's our stuff. Just so you know, we think about it too. We're aligned with you. We're a better partner for you than X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I like that. Is it reasonable to assume if you lead with that on sales that you might get the request back? Since you use Toyota, they may come back and say, okay, that's great. Here's some data. And then that's going to prompt you to say, okay, I do need to provide that data now. Yeah. But if it leads to more sales, then you're happy with that.
Right. That's right. It's probably it's a great problem to have, right? If you're having, if you're beating your competition, it's a relatively light lift for you to supply that information in order to sort of cozy yourself up with some of these really important customers of yours. And I think that it's definitely, there's enough companies that are going to be very late to this game that the ones that are doing it now absolutely have an advantage, right? They can establish the yard marker, right? When they talk to their customers, say, hey, make sure you ask our competitors. I know you're talking to, 4 of us. You should make sure you ask them about these things, knowing full well that they're not going to have anything, right? So, and I think, it leads to, it ends up being a sort of an economic gain. And that's where I think ESG is important, right? That, it is a business driver. It is something that people can see a return on. It's not purely a compliance thing. Now, as much as, I'm clearly an evangelist of ESG, but I understand for most companies hate it, right? Like it's an overhead compliance thing, right? And they suck it up, and our goal is to just make it easy and sort of make the problem go away. But I do think that there's a real opportunity to sort of change that mindset and say, okay, we're going to lead on this. I mean, I'm here in Alabama. There's a scrap metal company that we talked to, years ago, who was really adopting sort of sustainability and ESG company wide, and they were not a very large scrap metal firm. I mean, I think they had 11 or 12 plants, so not small, but big picture, not huge. And scrap metal is not an industry that jumps to mind when you think of like early adopters and innovation and these sorts of things. And so I said at one point, I'm delighted to work with you guys, but I have to ask, what what caused this? What's the catalyst for you guys actually thinking about this? Because they rebranded their website, everything was different. And they said, we're in a commodity business, and this gives us a competitive differentiator that our competitors don't have. And they said, furthermore, a majority of our workforce is under 35, and they're asking about this. And so we have to respond to it. If we want to hire people, we have to actually be thinking about these things. And so for them, it was a very strategic move, right? It was that they were going to give themselves a competitive advantage, and they were going to, be able to recruit new talent into the company. Which, and I always say, if scrap metal firms are thinking about ESG, we've crossed the chasm, right? Like it's it's got to be mainstream at that point.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the takeaway there is like, so what you're saying is not only are our clients going to start to feel this downward pressure from all the suppliers, but it does present an opportunity for a competitive advantage if we have some of these light studies, and we know that some of our big customers or prospects have these to be able to do it. But there's also another thing that we need to consider, and I think that this has been true, and I know we've done some discussions on like the new generation and what they want out of firms and what they want out of the company that they work for.
Mm-hmm.
And it has shifted to a lot of like maybe not formal ESG metrics, but it's really centered around a lot of those topics. So I do see a place in where if you have this, you can, kind of multi-purpose the data to act as a bit of a driver for, acquiring good talent, acquiring and retaining talent, showing them that that's important.
Yeah, no doubt at all. I think that, the interesting thing about ESG data that I find particularly fascinating is that it's multifaceted, right? 200 metrics across sort of a wide spectrum of things. And, it leads to a complication within a company because it has many different owners or perceived owners. And so we have conversations with, sort of accounting thinks they sort of should own ESG, accounting, finance, legal thinks they should own it, compliance thinks they should own it. So there's a lot of, parents.
Who do you think should own it?
I think it naturally, it ultimately, the word financial ends up in ESG, as even if it's non-financial. And I think as it becomes part of integrated reporting, I think it ends up in finance. That's where it
pull it together.
But again, so like of our customers, we work with at different companies, chief legal counsel, head of compliance, CFO, chief human resource officer, right? Mm-hmm. So marketing gets in there.
In my example, it was corporate affairs, right? That was the group that was corporate communication affairs. They're the ones who did it,
right? Like investor relations is, so you sit down a group of people and everyone can make a very valid claim. Like, no, this is, this is my domain, right? This is an investor relations thing. This is a finance thing. Some companies, a few of those roles roll up into the same, to the CFO, largely, but, that can lead to complications, right? Where you have many people who have this sort of, justified ownership of it. But it also makes it particularly interesting, right? Because it's one of the few data groups that span an entire company that you can look at on one sheet and get, very similar to sort of profit and loss in your financial statement. You can look at ESG data and say, oh, this is a really good snapshot of a company from beginning to end. This is how well a company is run or not. And I always think that that's a very impressive thing. But there's different groups that are pulling at this data, right? A big segment is employees, right? Gen Z is going to have this very powerful effect on all of this. right? As they enter the workforce and become managers in the workforce, as you noted, like the expectations are very, very different than, as my Gen X brain sometimes has trouble with it, but it doesn't make it not real, and even, my son, I have a 13-year-old son, and the stuff that he talks to me about is stuff that I think, when I was 13, I was not thinking about,
right.
Like the renewable energy coming into this house. Like he'll ask me these questions, and I'm like, what? What are you thinking about?
You haven't done your ESG study for your house. Shame on you.
I have not. I'm a bad person, a bad parent. But no, he shames me plenty for lots of stuff, and I think that we were talking about next year he'll be able to get a job, and he's we're talking about places that he would like to work ultimately as he grows up, right? So he's out of the I want to be a fireman type thing, and he said, well, I want a place that like treats people really well. Right. And I said, well, so you don't have to work a lot? He's like, no, but I think that, people being happy would, is important. I said, well, and also my ESG brain goes on, and I'm like, okay, well, would you prefer more money or more happiness? And he's like, oh, more happiness. No question. I was like, oh, interesting. Right. When I was 13, that was not the case. Right. When I was 35, that was not the case. That was, and so, I said, boy, and I think he's not exceptional in that sense, that this is like, there's a whole workforce that's coming up that's thinking about this balanced, right? It's like, okay, am I working for a company that is treating people fairly, that is educating people, or actually providing, training dollars to people? Are they good for the community that I live in? There's a number of factors, and we're living in an age. I think the big difference, people always ask me, like, why is this different? It's that the information is now available, right? You can find out about, just about any company you want, right? Private or public. You go to Glassdoor and read the reviews, just like they're on Amazon. You can read all of their disclosure, right? So I think in today's world, there's just a lot more information that consumers, employees, investors can use that's at their disposal to make these decisions, and companies have to react to that.
Yeah, I think that you made an important note there, though, is yes, there's a ton of information out there, but unfortunately, a lot of it's self-reported. And so by being able to make this more compliance and validated by a third party, the better. So companies can get ahead of, somebody that's, some disgruntled employee that says, oh, they do this and it's terrible, or they do that. It's like, of course, we'll see how tested the ESG reporting gets, over time, just like financial reporting, right? Enron. It's like, so there will be those, but it'll be, but it would be good for somebody to be able to promote that and put it out there, as opposed to just allowing the general public just to be social warriors and just throw stuff out there that might not be true.
And I think it's a great segue into the topic of greenwashing, which is, along with sort of the political debate, you hear about greenwashing as the sort of the next hottest topic. And greenwashing is basically when people try to sort of put forward sort of positions from a marketing perspective that aren't actually true, right? They try to make their company look a lot better. This is a bit of a time-honored tradition in all aspects, but it's particularly acute when it comes to disclosure data and around an unregulated, unstandardized body of data around ESG and sustainability data. And there's because there's no standardization, because there's no regulation in the United States, I think it's a particularly worrisome problem. So in the EU it has begun much greater enforcement around greenwashing. Now they're leveling big fines.
Oh.
They have a regulatory body. They published the EU taxonomy that basically said, if here are what the metrics mean. When you report them, they have to be in this format. And if you're not telling the truth, and we find out, you're going to pay a penalty. There's sort of a punitive aspect to this. The U.S. is still very much it's a voluntary market, and still self-reported, and people always say, well, how can I spot greenwashing? And I think when it comes to ESG, it's really about the comprehensiveness of the data, right? So if it's quite easy for me to read an ESG report or a CSR, corporate social responsibility report, which they're often called, and when companies, I'll give people some examples. If your listeners go to IKEA and read IKEA's ESG report, it's extremely comprehensive, to the point where it's probably going to, put some people to sleep. But it is, they've assembled a team of scientists who audit it. That and you can drill down on the data, and you can really understand what they're doing. I won't shame any companies, but there's the converse of that is you go in and it's just it reads like a PR piece, right? It's we gave out 5,000 masks for COVID, and we have employee bring your kid to work days, and like that's the level of sort of the disclosure. And I think that's the first sort of sign to me that this isn't being taken seriously. They're just, the reports are mostly pretty pictures of trees and, sunsets and things like that. And it's, they're feel-good pieces. And most importantly, I would say that the big difference is they don't publish a roadmap, where they don't say, this is what we're trying to get to. This is how we've done along the way. Whereas if you look at IKEA, if Toyota is another good example that has a very good report, where they publish sort of what their goals are and how they're tracking to their goals. And what you'll see is, they haven't hit them yet. They're very upfront about, why they didn't hit them, where they are, what they're doing to get there. If you don't see that in a report, you're probably looking at some form of greenwashing. It's really funny because, yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, I think the consistency is important. I mean, so you mean to tell me that my Lucky Charms aren't healthy for me, even though they provide their whole grain and provide vitamins and minerals all over the front of that thing? Right. So it's kind of like the FDA or whatever, like making sure on the back of the ingredients, it actually lists everything out, and it's all at the same, like 2,000 calorie, you know what I mean? So people can actually tell what's in their food. So same kind of thing, having
servings in this box.
Yeah, exactly. So having that same boilerplate does make sense for being able to compare data. And then, of course, we need to make sure that it's not all marketing on the front of the box.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's very interesting. There's one, and I sort of tell the story, which is there's a public company, and they're responsible for building more schools in Africa than any other company there is. They spend an enormous amount building elementary schools. Their entire story from a ESG perspective is about this. It's community engagement. They're heavily invested in. That company is Philip Morris. And so if I don't tell you the rest of the story, like if I don't tell you who they are, you think, boy, that's a great company. Like that's
Sure.
And then the minute I say, here's who it is, like, they do something that's pretty destructive, right? Like they're, this is not traditionally known as a great company, but they do a very good thing, right? Like they happen to do a very good thing. It's slightly self-serving, and they need a workforce that has a certain amount of education, but I think that another aspect of this is taking a look at the entire company. right? And not getting sucked into one particular narrative. It's very easy to do because even I read Philip Morris's report and I was like, maybe they are, like they're really doing good work on this one front. As someone pointed out, like, yeah, but they didn't talk about anything else.
So what's missing?
Like, oh, yeah, that's a good
that
point.
Seems so helpful.
What's missing?
I was going to say, I have a daughter who's older than your son, but she's very socially aware. But she'll make comments of, I'll wear an athletic wear with a brand name. Did you know they're just a terrible this and that? And I've often wondered, so where would I go to find out if that's true? And if I look at like their ads, they may say we're making one of the most sustainable products and we treat our workers really well. But it sounds like you've given me really good sources saying, what if I did look at their CSR and say, is it a one page with a bunch of cool pictures? You're like, oh, there's a lot not being said here versus others. So that's very helpful to think of.
That's right. And, there's lots of philosophical debates about can a bad company do good things? Can a good company do bad things? I mean, I think that this will be a sort of there's no answer to this, but I do think that, today there are services that also exist where you can look up companies from a, not even an ESG perspective, but just on like worker rights. And I think I'm trying to think of, like, you can go to howgood.com, I believe, and you can look at a lot of supply chain data. I believe that a lot of it's public. Is another good site. So I think, again, there's a lot of the internet has really helped us. So we can look these things up and know for a fact that these companies do things that align with your values, which I think is important. That is, I don't want to muddy the waters between ESG and sort of impact investing and socially responsible investing, very different things. And we're very focused on ESG and reporting and ESG program building. But I do think, everything's born from the same idea originally that ultimately your values are what you consume.
We've gone through a lot of different topics. I'll ask you and Adam, and then I'll go. One thing that you would want people to take away from this. So thinking of an accounting audience, and I'm guessing the majority didn't walk in saying I'm an ESG expert. So I just love what's the maybe one thing you're saying, please walk away understanding this.
So walk away understanding that ESG is going to be important for your clients. And at some point in the trajectory of their business, it's going to come up. And it's valuable for you as an accounting firm or an accountant to be knowledgeable about it, to be able to approach your clients about it. And in many cases, I think it's a valuable revenue stream for your listeners.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Adam, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the big thing is that, for the past few years, I've just kind of put it on the back burner. So knowing that it's increasingly becoming more and more a part of what we do, making sure we have a knowledge for it, but then also reaching out and finding the resources, I think is an important thing. Just knowing that there's, people out there like Kai that can help you so you don't have to be, the subject matter expert. And this is important.
Yeah.
And
that's certainly, that's how we're involved with accounting firms is, a lot of them don't have the wherewithal or desire to ramp up a consulting firm within them. And so we love working with accounting firms as strategic partners and working under their brand or sort of directly with their customers.
Yeah, and I think the way you said we could have the conversation with the clients is just a great thing that I know some of the biggest customers, I can glance and see if they have strong CSR reports and have that conversation and maybe introduce it or may find out they've been looking at this for a while and they just didn't feel a need to include me in that. So
that's right.
This has been
if nothing
really
else,
helpful.
you sound much more knowledgeable, I think. Even if a customer says, it never comes up, our customers aren't doing that. It still adds to your credibility.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you so much. Very educational, very much in line with the kind of things I think that our audience really wants to learn about. So we really appreciate it.
Of course. My pleasure. It was great speaking with both of you.
Thanks.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.